You know, over the years, I've noticed something about Justin Trudeau and how he attacks his enemies. He accuses his political enemies of the very thing that he himself is guilty of. It's like if he stole a bag of apples, he'd stand up the next day and accuse his opponents of being an apple thief.
While the Conservative leader is muzzling his own caucus and putting himself first, we'll keep putting Canadians.
The Honourable.
This one is just too easy. He walked into it. He had to muzzle a member from Newfoundland who called for an end to his leadership, joining another senator who did the same.
And I went through the entire Oxford English Dictionary looking for the right word that describes that. And there just is not a word in the entire English language that accurately reflects that. There are words like hypocrisy, projecting, gaslighting, lying. But what Trudeau does is more than that. In some ways, it's a blending of aspects of all those other words into one new word. So, I'm going to petition the folks at the Oxford English Dictionary and try to get them to add a new word to the English language called Trudeauing. In the search through the English language, going back to Shakespeare and Chaucer, when you think about all the countries of the world that have added their own flavor to the English language, Canada, New Zealand, India, Australia, none of that has a word to accurately describe what Justin Trudeau does to his political enemies. And not in an abstract way. We're not talking about concepts here. We're talking about very real, tangible actions or words that Trudeau has done or said that he then flips around and tries to accuse his opponents. Let's start with the most obvious one. A friend of mine said to me one time, you know how you can tell when you've won an argument with a liberal? It's when they accuse you of being a racist. Justin Trudeau does that all the time. You know, I'm sure that he's called at least 10 people a racist before he has his breakfast. It's a standard liberal tactic. Lose an argument, accuse your opponent of being a racist. Now, of course, Justin Trudeau's done this on many occasions.
Souvent misogynes, souvent racistes aussi.
They claim to be tough on crime, but really just tough on Black Canadians and Indigenous people.
Angry mobs hurling racist epithets.
All that from a guy who wore racist costumes, dressed himself up in clothes and makeup, including his entire body, to make a mockery of Black people. And he turns around and accuses other people of the very thing he himself is guilty of.
Because anti-Black racism is happening here, everywhere in Canada, every single day.
Soleil and Solara, do you want to stand up and ask a question?
Why did you paint your face brown?
It was something I shouldn't have done because it hurt people. We all have to work together to make sure that it doesn't happen, okay?
Another attack that Justin Trudeau loves to use is the issue with First Nations. He'll often accuse his opponents of not prioritizing or taking seriously our relationship with Indigenous communities.
These are the hard truths we must confront as a society.
And then what does he do after creating the first stat holiday for Truth and Reconciliation Day, a day where Canadians were encouraged to learn more about our First Peoples and to attend events to strengthen the relationship? What does Justin Trudeau do?
Trudeau's plane, a Royal Canadian Air Force Challenger, left the national capital at 7 a.m. Ottawa time. He was within a couple of 100 kilometers of Kamloops, but he flew right over. Trudeau and his wife are then seen hiking the beach near the $18 million oceanside home that they have rented. It's a home dubbed Surfer's Paradise.
This is a classic Trudeauism. In fact, after he got caught, his explanation was an even more important part of Trudeauing, where he says that it's a learning opportunity for everyone.
The first National Day of Truth and Reconciliation was a time for Indigenous people and non-Indigenous people alike to reflect and connect, think about the past, but also focus on the future.
Trying to bring every Canadian in with his guilty actions. He's the one that chose to go surfing on Truth and Reconciliation Day. He's the one that's living it up on a beach in BC on a day that was meant for Canadians to learn more about our Indigenous communities. And then he says that all Canadians can learn from this mistake? Classic Trudeauing. Another famous Trudeau attack is accusing his opponents of being anti-women, saying that they don't stand up for women's rights or they don't respect women.
First of all, I'm going to keep saying loud and clearly that I am a feminist until it is met with a shrug.
Don't forget the Jody Wilson-Raybould scandal, where she stood up to his attempts to politically interfere in a criminal court prosecution, and she got fired.
I experienced a consistent and sustained effort by many people within the government to secure a deferred prosecution agreement with SNC-Lavalin. These events involved 11 people from the Prime Minister's office, the Privy Council office, and the Office of the Minister of Finance.
Expressing a lack of confidence in our government and in me personally as leader, it's become clear that Ms. Wilson-Raybould and Dr. Philpott can no longer remain part of our Liberal team.
Remember when he used to say, add women, change outcomes? Well, I guess when you remove women, you get the same old Liberals. It doesn't stop there. A former Liberal MP blew the whistle on how Justin Trudeau treated her, trying to bully her, yelling at her, berating her to the point that she couldn't serve in Parliament anymore.
I wanted him to know that, I was smart, I was strategic, and I didn't want to be a token in his government. Well, it's not that I felt tokenized, Andrew. There's evidence of that. In my role with the Prime Minister, the 3 international events that I attended were the state visit to Washington, in which I only met Obama. I had no other meetings or anything else to do during that whole time. The opening of the National African American Museum in Washington, again, no other meetings, and the inauguration of President Akufo-Addo in Ghana. All 3 of those international events had a very specific focus, and it was related to my Blackness. Well, the conversation was a courtesy call to tell him that I was no longer going to be running in the 2019 election. What I got was, Selena, I can't have you make this announcement today because Jody Wilson-Raybould resigned today and I can't have 2 powerful women of color leave. He went on to talk about his privilege and how people keep talking about his privilege. He went on to say that I should appreciate him. I should appreciate what he's done for me in the time that I've been in government, as if I didn't work hard. And at the end of it, at the end of his rant, I said, motherfucker, who the fuck do you think you're talking to?
First of all, I'm going to keep saying loud and clearly that I am a feminist until it is met with a shrug.
Now, gaslighting is an important aspect of Trudeauing. It doesn't quite capture it enough, but it's a big part of it. Like, remember when Justin Trudeau brought in all kinds of laws and rules, forcing people to lose their jobs if they didn't want to take the COVID vaccine, if they wanted to make their own healthcare decision?
The mandatory vaccination that's in place immediately for federal employees will look like. Proof of vaccination will be required by no later than the end of this month for all federal employees. Mid-November, enforcement measures will make sure that everyone is vaccinated.
People who choose not to get vaccinated don't get on a plane or a train, don't get to work in the public service, don't get to go to movie theaters or gyms or restaurants and other non-essential services. That's how we keep people safe.
Justin Trudeau made it so you could literally lose your job. You couldn't get on an airplane. You couldn't get on a train. Members of our armed forces who had served their country with pride and honor were suddenly kicked out for wanting to make their own healthcare choices. And then what does Trudeau do? He goes on TV and says this.
And therefore, while not forcing anyone to get vaccinated, I chose to make sure that all the incentives were there.
Classic Trudeauing, taking gaslighting to a whole new level that it needs a new word. Another big example of Trudeauing that you'll see time and time again. In fact, you'll probably see more of it as we get closer and closer to the next election. And that is Justin Trudeau accusing his opponents of dividing Canadians.
It has always been easier to divide in politics than to bring people together. But it's really hard to govern responsibly once you've created wedges within the population, once you've turned people against one another and made them more fearful. The small fringe minority holding unacceptable
views that they're expressing. Expressed by a few people gathered in Ottawa right now. Microchips about, God knows what else that go with the tinfoil hats.
This is the most divisive prime minister in Canadian history. He literally plays one province off against another, one region against another. He plays different ethnic community groups off against each other. He has one message for one group of Canadians and a completely different message for another. And how can we forget? Justin Trudeau made this outrageous accusation.
Conservative Party members can stand with people who wave swastikas. They can stand with people who wave the Confederate flag. We will choose to stand with Canadians who deserve to be able to get...
Conservatives of standing with people who wave swastikas. And then, just a short time later, he allowed an actual Nazi to come and be recognized on the floor of the House of Commons during a state visit by Ukrainian President Zelensky. At a time when Russian propaganda was literally trying to define the conflict in Ukraine from their perspective as a war against Nazis, Justin Trudeau allowed one of the most embarrassing diplomatic incidents to happen in Canadian history.
I think it's going to be really important that all of us push back against Russian propaganda.
After accusing other MPs of standing with people who wave swastikas, this is the epitome of Trudeauing. Now, of course, there are components of Trudeauing that are similar to other words that exist in our language. For example, lying. Trudeau lies a lot. Hypocrisy. Too numerous to count. And gaslighting. Well, we all know examples of Justin Trudeau telling us that he never did things when we know he did. Now, I was thinking about this over the Christmas break. You see, sometimes dictionaries impose a definition and we can look it up and say, okay, that's what that word means. But over time, if people themselves start using a word or they've made up a word that catches on, the Oxford English Dictionary will incorporate that new word into the language. That's something that's so neat about the evolution and the flow of English. I don't think the Oxford English Dictionary will add a new word just because I've shot this video and I send them a letter. But maybe if enough Canadians add their voice and say, yes, we've noticed this too, and we need a new word that really captures the new depths to which Justin Trudeau has sunk. Yes, he's hypocritical. Yes, he's told lies. Yes, he's engaged in corruption and scandals. And yes, he's gaslit Canadians, but what he does is so unique. It takes all of that together that we need a new word. So, please, take a few moments and sign my petition. I'm hoping that if the good people at Clarendon Press in Oxford receive enough names from Canadians that they'll add the word Trudeauing to the English language. And as always, thanks for watching.